Hey guys, and welcome back to another Lost Bits video right here on TetraBitGaming, the series where we explore the unused, altered, and unseen content in gaming. With the release of Kirby Air Riders just around the corner, I figured I'd finally cover the original 2003 Air Ride for the GameCube. Now personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this game, but I know there are legions of fans that consider this to be one of the best games on the console. Anyways, let's get to it. Drive your dragoons into that like button below. It's time to check out some Kirby Air Ride Lost Bits. Alright, so to kick this video off, let's wind things back for this game to before it even became Air Ride. So for those that didn't know, originally, Kirby Air Ride was actually once planned to be a sequel to the 1995 Super Nintendo game Kirby's Dream Course, with the going name of Kirby Bowl 64, as Kirby's Dream Course is known as Kirby Bowl in Japan. This original iteration was initially shown off at the 1995 Shoshinkai event in Japan, where it was far enough along in development to be one of the only two publicly playable demos there, alongside Super Mario 64 when the Nintendo 64 was first unveiled. Being a basic demo, unsurprisingly, some of the gameplay looked rather rudimentary. Like here, this looks like a multiplayer mode where the different Kirbys would just try to stay on this undulating platform while trying to knock off the others. Honestly, it's kinda reminiscent of the mechanics from Super Smash Bros., which isn't that out of pocket as Masahiro Sakurai directed both games. Then there's also this footage of the game, where we can see Kirby snowboarding down the floating checkered hill, as well as rolling into a star in ball form. Now, this game was eventually renamed to Kirby Air Ride when it resurfaced in E3 1996 and then once again in 1997. But then it was shelved for several years as Nintendo apparently wanted to focus more on the N64 game 1080 Snowboarding. And I assume Sakurai shifted focus to the original Super Smash Bros. As well as Melee during this time. And it wasn't until 6 years later, in 2003, where the reworked Kirby Air Ride resurfaced once again before it released later that year. Yeah, if I had a nickel for every time a Kirby game had a crazy long and tumultuous development. And now getting to the release build of Kirby Air Ride, first let's chat about some unused graphics that are left over in the game. First up is this image that shows off an early version of the top ride result screen, which appears to either be a mock-up or one taken during one of the developers debugging the game, as each of the different stats and results are identical for each player here. And here the different stats include max speed, average speed, total distance traveled, items obtained and used, and more. In this image, we can also see this character up here, which if you've watched enough of my videos, you'll know that this translates to temporary. And this character is something that pops up rather regularly in placeholder graphics. Next, there's this unused banner of Kirby with this airplane-looking air ride machine in the background, which itself also seems to have been cut, as no such machine appears in the final cut of this game. And then there's also this alert that's unused, or rather unseen, as although it isn't seen under normal circumstances, it can actually be seen in the game via glitches or certain exploits to get close to a death plane, or in some unused maps, which we'll check out later in this video. And based on how it's seen in at least one of those maps, this seems to have been meant as some sort of warning to the player to avoid sections that would lead to Kirby falling off. And furthermore, there's also this sound effect that's associated with this alert. Next up, there's also an unused graphic for an equally unused top right item referred to only as Waver Behind when translated from its Japanese name. And fortunately, this unused item actually still has some leftover functionality if it's implemented into the game. And using it will cause some, gas to start getting expelled behind a player, which causes the view to get distorted. Did Kirby just fart? Now, it's believed that the purpose of this item was just to disorient other players in a race. This item also has a pair of associated sound effects, including this sound effect for picking it up, as well as this similar sounding one that's just not as loud. Then switching to the 3D side of things, this game also actually has a 20th machine that was cut from the game, and it's seen as this placeholder looking wheel model, simply referred to as wheel normal. Based on it, well, being a wheel, it's likely that this was a placeholder for the wheelie type vehicles like the bike, scooter, and Rex Wheelie. And like the previously mentioned item, this unused wheel machine also still has leftover functionality and can even still be made playable where Kirby gets taken for a spin. Yeah, unlike the other wheelie machines where Kirby is sat on a seat, for this one, Kirby is instead locked onto a position on the wheel itself, which results in a pretty funny looking riding animation. And yeah, the same goes for King Dedede as well as Meta Knight. And the physics for this wheel seem to be pretty whack too, like when you get knocked back, you get sent flying super high into the sky. Now, next up, Kirby Air Ride actually has a bunch of unused levels left over in the game too, a grand total of 6 in fact. Going in order as how they're found in the game's files, first up we have one simply listed as Dummy. Now this is a largely empty area with the exception of there being a collision plane at the top which Kirby will latch onto. And this plane can actually be made visible too with some of the game's leftover debug features. The plane is also finite, so if you drive too far to the left or right, you'll actually fall off of it, which will cause Kirby to flip over before then falling infinitely in the dark void. Now, just based on how this map functions, it's thought that this one was used as a test for driving upside down. Next, we have a map just referred to as Test, and true to its name, this appears to be a test of a rather short track in a pretty basic shape. As you can see, it's a snow-themed track, and there's really not all that much to it, but we do have a few objects here, including some stars, 2 yellow as well as 1 purple one. There are these green arrows, these weird teardrop-looking things that look like eyes, as well as these shapes here, but unfortunately, none of these seem to be functional at all. And then towards the end of the track, there's this long but rather small diameter pipe that you can actually still drive through, which is kinda neat. But yeah, not much else here for this one, so now let's move on to Test 6, which starts us off on a long and straight road here, which seems to have perhaps been a test for the game's drag racing. Here at the start and near the end of this road, we can also find some of these really basic looking cylinders that are used to show the start and end of the track. Then, off in the distance to the left from the spawn point is a platform with various sections textured with different designs, indicating different ground material. And they all have the word yuka plastered all over them, which translates from Japanese to the floor. Here we got dirt, one that looks like an oil slick or something. There's a grass and ice one. I'm not really sure what these light or dark gray ones are, but the dark one really has a lot of friction and will slow you down quickly if you charge your vehicle on it. As you probably guessed, this section was used to test how the different terrain types affect the game's driving mechanics. This area actually reminds me of the test map we saw back in my video on Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards, where different terrain types were also tested there. Then after this map, next we have Test 7, which again seems to be set in a snow-themed area, and once again we have a straight path like in Test 6, but this time there's also a tiled wall to our left. And also, unlike the previous map, this straight path will decline at steeper and steeper angles as you go along. The first 2 declines won't cause Kirby to start gliding in the air, but every subsequent one will, and I can only assume that this map was used to test that. And like I mentioned earlier, here we can see the drop warning icon pop up if we turn around at the starting area and move towards the edge here. It can also be seen if you fly through the wall on the left, as well as at the bottom level of this map. And yeah, I think this basically confirms that this graphic was simply once planned to be used as a warning when getting too close to an edge or a death plane. Now next up, we have a map simply titled Simple, but it's everything but that, as this is by far the biggest and most extensive unused map in the game. In fact, this map is so big that it's actually the biggest file in the game that isn't a video file. Anyways, as you might expect based on that factoid, this map is quite massive, and as you can see, it's absolutely filled to the brim with different objects. And if you've been around the channel for a while, you'll know I absolutely love test rooms like these. This test map, as you can see, also has a whole bunch of placeholder textures like we saw in Test 6, with various colors and Japanese text, and there are lots of them to go through here. Also, I'm just using Google Translate for all of the Japanese text here, so apologies if the translations aren't 100% accurate. For basically all of these ramps seen here at different angles and many of the different platforms, they again have "the floor" text on top, and their sides will typically have this text which just translates to "wall." These ramps were all likely used to test the game's machines and how they'd ride at different angles, and some of them emerge from the floor for a bit before then sinking back down. Several of these big wall things just move back and forth and will knock you around if you get in their way. And honestly, it's kinda just surreal seeing all of these objects move around like this. Like, something about this just feels off. Then off to the side here is also this ramp that leads onto this rotating plane, which is kinda cool to just rip around on. And near the middle-ish is this green block that doesn't seem to really do anything, but the text on it translates to "box area." Next up, there's this large green object with the Japanese katakana text here translating to "super jump," and touching this object anywhere will launch Kirby into the air, similar to the launch panel thing seen in City Trial. So perhaps this was some sort of test for those. Then near this object is this other one that translates to something like "free movement," and it doesn't seem to really do anything. And then there's also another super jump object here, but this one also has text at the end which translates to "notice." I guess this being a warning of the upcoming super jump object, and when Kirby enters inside this one, the camera will like zoom out and up to look down at Kirby at a different angle. Next, nearby, we also have this pink object that translates to "door open," though it too doesn't really seem to do anything. These massive blue objects that tower over this section of the map translate to "ring check H." And as that text suggests, these all seem to be a test of the flying rings seen in City Trial, as just like those, flying through these here will give Kirby a boost of speed in the air. Next, we got this light green box that translates to "shielding 2," and this doesn't really seem to do anything, but it's only visible from one side. And there's also this section here with a very wide texture that has two planes that are also only visible from one side. And they only have collision on one side too, so once you get into this corridor of sorts between the two, you'll be stuck between them and have to ride all the way out to one side to escape. This orange text here on this other corridor of sorts translates to "rebound wall." This teal object has the word "local death" on the wall here, and this one actually seems to be a test of a death barrier, as touching this one will cause Kirby to fall off his vehicle and plummet to his death. And then lastly, for the notable bigger block objects here, there are several of these magenta ones that translate to "area light." And when entering them, Kirby will change colors between being more green and more red. Or rather, it's the lighting on Kirby that seems to change color based on the naming. And yeah, it was kinda cool to see Kirby all fired up looking like this. Now next up, there are several smaller objects around the map too, with some translating to "dash," and big surprise, they function like dash panels and give Kirby a boost of speed if you charge up the vehicle while inside of them. Next, we got these blocks that translate to "warp gate," as well as this one that translates to "warp exit," suggesting that there was supposed to be some sort of warping tested with these, but they don't seem to function here. There's a small moving block here that just pushes you around, and this other moving block is just another dash panel one. Then another section in this map has these two low platforms, and although they just have the same floor text on them, they actually play a different sound effect when touched. This first one will play a sound effect of the crowd cheering. And then the other one will be of the crowd like gasping. Next, there are also several different test grind rails here too. The first one seems to be a test of splitting paths. Taking the left one exits the rail, but if you go right, it will actually lead to another split, this time with 3 options, each of them just leading to the end of it. Then there's this set of 4 side by side, which just seems to test the ability to jump between adjacent rails. There's a really long rail that just goes around the area and starts to quickly zigzag in a section, and I want to believe this was just one of the devs having a bit of fun with this. And then the last test rail is this wacky one that awkwardly moves around. You can still ride on it, but it's just kind of weird. Then after that are several floor objects all concentrated in this area here. These include these spin attack panels that cause Kirby to spin if you press the A button while on them. We got these circle boost pad things here that unfortunately don't seem to be functional, and then there are also these question mark panels as well, which are thankfully functional and will of course give Kirby a random copy ability. And as you saw, for these they are all seen in a range of sizes from small to large. Nearby we also got a bunch of boost panels also in a range of sizes, and these are seen in 2 different types. One type which boosts Kirby in the direction that it's seen pointing, and then the other is a omnidirectional one which will boost the player in whichever direction they are heading. And then lastly for this map, there's this large object here that doesn't have any Japanese text on it. And flying into it will just cause Kirby to stop and start flickering, exactly how Kirby does in the Target Flight minigame. So it's likely that this was a test for that. Unfortunately for us though, ramming into this wall will basically trap you there until you reset the game. Now, if all of the test gimmicks seen in this map weren't enough, last but not least for the unused maps is Simple 2. And this one features numerous additional things that the devs were testing and toying around with. For starters, there's this bridge here with a pillar under it that you can actually break if you ram into it. Unfortunately, nothing really happens to the bridge itself if you do this before the pillar then eventually respawns. And I don't remember anything like this being seen in the game, but I guess this might have been a test of a destructible bridge. And what I thought was extra interesting was when I got close enough, the default wave or whatever texture ended up changing to this one of a fella looking through a camera or something. And yeah, I just thought this was pretty weird to see. Near this bridge are also these basic cylinder objects that are also destructible, and we don't even need to speculate for what these are, as there's a nice big old sign here that indicates that these Sango are placeholder tests for the coral things seen near the water in City Trials. Next up, we have these small basic buildings here, and at first I thought they were just there for show. But that was until I boosted into one of them, which caused the texture to change from the default one to a leaf one, and then banging into it some more changed it to an icy texture, and boosting into it even more caused the building to get destroyed. So it looks like the different textures here weren't used to symbolize different terrain types, but rather a level of destruction. I guess a test for how some of the structures can get progressively damaged and destroyed in the game's City Trials. Then near these homes is this larger structure with a big fan in it, as well as a switch that if pressed, it deactivates the moving laser found at the other end of the section here, that if Kirby touches, it will set him on fire. And then after exiting this thing, there's this circular object here that just starts out motionless, but will then start to spiral, which is, cool. Next we got these 3 switches, which I ran over multiple times, but I honestly couldn't see them changing anything. Then we got this lineup of these thin tiles that play like a bell-like sound when you drive over them. There are these 4 rails in red, green, blue, and black, and you'd think that you could swap between them like the ones we saw in the previous map, but nope, you're locked into whichever one you start on. And although it looks like it should end here, it actually continues on an invisible path for a bit as it turns, before then getting back onto another set here. Then we have some switches here that will cause some blocks to emerge from and sink back into the floor. And driving through this middle archway here does the same thing. And then there's this large red, white, and blue panel here that will like slingshot you off of it into a different direction. At first I thought this might be a test of the whirlpool seen in City Trials, but they just spin you around and don't really slingshot you like this. And instead, there's this spinning platform here, which seems to act more like the whirlpools. Next, there's this ramp that angles up and down, and driving through this arch with the H icon above it gives Kirby a massive speed boost. There are also similar signs with an L on them, which give a smaller speed boost, so it seems like the L stands for low boost and H for high. And taking this ramp sends Kirby through this green object, which has text on it translating to height measurement. Now, nothing really seems to happen when you fly through this, but I guess measuring the height at which Kirby flies through it was the intended purpose. And if you weren't ramped out yet, would you look at that? Looks like we got some more of them, this time in a bunch of different material, including the oil slick one, metal, this cool looking water droplet texture that seems to be representing water. Again, not really sure what this one is. There's an ice one, and then the leaf one we saw earlier on the building, which is different than the grass texture we saw in the other map. It functions differently too, being more wet and squishy. Next, we got a series of ramps here that pop out and back into the floor. Then there's this object where once you get onto the lower section, it will raise you up to the higher one, and once you get on the higher one, it will then lower you back down. And near this is another ramp that drops down to a set of platforms, the second of which is kinda weird, as it quickly changes material from the default one to the leaf one, and then to the ice, before then disappearing. Seeing as how this cycles through the same textures we saw with the buildings earlier, I guess this might have been a test of platforms that would deteriorate as you drove on them. We got this pipe here that you can ride around inside, which can get a little trippy if you spend too long in it. And then lastly for this map is a large assortment of different placeholder tiles in the middle section with a bunch of different effects. These include this spin one, which will cause Kirby to go into a spin. This deer panel will cause Kirby to jump up, similar to the jump panels in the City Trial. The question mark triangle one acts like the random copy ability things. There's this red plus tile that seems like it should be one that would heal Kirby, but it doesn't seem to do anything. Then near it is this one, which if you pass it and enter this little building, Kirby will actually get shot out the back towards the ramps. So this one was a test of a cannon shot mechanic, which I guess explains the basic looking cannon thing on the tile here. Then we got this normal looking version of the thin tiles we saw earlier, revealing that it's actually a music note on them, and although it's bigger here, this one just plays the same sound effect as the others. There's two more green star tiles here, one which has the text "Wrought Stone Plate" on it, which I was expecting to have some different effect, but it also just seems to give Kirby a boost. And there's also this one with "Spin" on it, though it doesn't actually make Kirby spin, nor does anything different happen if you spin on it. It just gives Kirby the same boost again. Next, we got this claw tile here that if you wait around for this rotating little object to be above the panel as you boost under it, it will actually pick Kirby up and bring him over to this other panel with the claw open. This feather panel gives Kirby a soft, small jump. Here we can see the fella looking through the camera again, and driving over this panel will cause a crowd cheering sound effect to play. There's this tile here that kind of just like pushes Kirby off of it, and then we also got this water tile, as well as this one with what looks like some pages on it, and unfortunately, neither of these seem to function here. Although maybe not as expansive as the previous test map, there's still quite a lot to mess around with here. And overall, although the first Unused maps were cool on their own, these last two were so cool to goof around in. Now, I've been checking out and exploring test maps for nearly a decade now, and I gotta say, this has got to be up there with some of the best test maps I've come across so far. And my friends, we'll leave it there for Kirby Air Ride, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, check out some of my other lost bits, and be sure to subscribe to the channel with the notification bell to find your way back here in the future. And as always, thank you all so much for popping by today, and I will see you in a bit.